fever. Okay, whether the fever was present at the onset of the illness is very important. 1 minute. 1 minute, please. So whether the fever was present at the onset of the illness, and secondly, the nature of the onset of illness. So first, let's elaborate on whether the fever was present at the onset of illness. Why is it so important that you have to get a history of fever at the onset?
Suggest some infective cause, ma'am.
Polio in case of
Yes, Tilakavati?
Polio, if there is
Yes.
fever at the onset of illness, we could think of polio.
Yeah.
Or if there is fever or some other respiratory tract infection or GI infection, we can, prior to 2 to 3 weeks, we can think of GBS.
Very good. So the onset of fever is mainly to find out if the child had if the child has a poliomyelitis. Usually the fever will be present at the onset of the illness. And similarly, in myositis, epidural abscess, and infective conditions wherein the infection directly, the virus or the infective process affects the spinal cord directly, and hence a fever will be present at the onset of the illness. If in case there's demyelination or such as deep Guillain-Barré syndrome or diphtheria, this is an immune-mediated process. Hence, a fever usually will be present 2 or 3 weeks prior to the onset of illness. They can present with a upper respiratory infection or a GE infection, following which they can present with the symptoms of fever. They may not present with fever at the onset of paralysis. Okay, what is the next important parameter you would concentrate on with respect to the history? That is the nature of onset. I think Raghu has already mentioned about it. So what are the points you will ask in the nature of onset?
The duration, onset is acute or insidious in onset. And then what type of weakness is it? Is it a flaccid weakness or spastic weakness? Is it descending or ascending paralysis? Okay. Any involvement of bowel bladder involvement?
Yes. Yeah. So the rapidity of onset of the illness is very important, because if some of the illnesses can start over a period of hours, like in Guillain-Barré syndrome, trauma, myasthenia, and conditions, metabolic conditions like hypophosphatemia, hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, these conditions on wherein you can correct once you correct the electric disturbances, the child is going to become all right. So these are the conditions which have to be detected immediately and appropriately managed. So then the subacute onset is wherein the illness occurs over a period of weeks, like polio and non-polio enteroviruses, which can have the problem occur over a period of days to weeks. Usually polio and non-polio enteroviruses, the illness starts over a period of 24 to 48 hours. And other infective myelitis can also present over a period of days to weeks. And then thirdly, some of the infections can occur over a period of weeks to months. It is in diphtheria, where you have a child who is usually presents with a post-diphtheritic neuritis, but however had a bull neck or a swelling of the neck to even 3 to 4 weeks prior or even months prior to the onset of illness. So that is very important to identify the nature of onset. Will help us to identify the etiology of the illness. Then thirdly, what are the other important point you'll take in the history? That is the pattern of weakness. So Tilakavati, can you just tell what are the patterns of weaknesses you can detect the history in a patient with acute flaccid paralysis?
Whether it is ascending type or descending type, and involvement of all forelimbs at a time, or whether it is asymmetrical, and presence of proximal or distal muscle involvement.
Yes. Yes. So
and also frontal muscle and hip muscle weakness.
Yes. So you have to identify whether it's an ascending paralysis or a descending paralysis. What are the conditions? There are a few conditions like the GBS or the rabies, wherein the paralysis is usually ascending. And you have in rabies where the paralysis starts off from the site of bite and then ascends towards the brain. And descending paralysis is in conditions like diphtheria and botulism, where you have the paralysis descend down from sometimes you may also have a bulbar palsy and then involvement of the upper limbs followed by the lower limbs. And you should also look for the symmetry of the illness. Symmetry, like whether there's involvement on both sides, like in Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis, and rabies, wherein you have a symmetry of involvement, and asymmetrical involvement in polio and other non-polio viral infections. And as you said, proximal muscle involvement in myopathy and neuromuscular junctions, and distal muscle involvement in like a Glovenstock anesthesia in Guillain-Barré syndrome and peripheral neuropathy. So after taking this history, what are the other important parameters you would want to concentrate on to get to the diagnosis? And you should also remember that you should differentiate an upper motor neuron lesion from a lower motor neuron lesion. So how in the history would you elicit whether this child has an upper motor neuron lesion or a lower motor neuron lesion? Prachi there? Tilagavati? Prachi, how will you identify whether, from the history, how do you recognize the child has an upper motor neuron lesion or a lower motor neuron lesion?
We will try to find the sensory level, ma'am. If there is, or like an LETM and a demyelinating disorder, we might have a sensory level.
What did you just ask the parents or the caretaker? What is the history you will ask?
If the sensations will be lost in the initial phase in the lower limbs, ma'am. So
so it's very easy to answer, like flail limbs and flaccid paralysis, right? So you ask for whether the limbs are flail, whether the baby was very flail to handle, or if the limbs were very rigid to handle, whether any difficulty in moving the limbs, usually in an upper motor neuron paralysis. First of all, you have to differentiate whether this child has an upper motor neuron or a lower motor neuron involvement, because some of the conditions can present in spinal shock and then progress on to go in for an upper motor neuron involvement. Okay, so what other relevant history other than the 3 parameters which we already mentioned would help us? Yes. Other than
sensory
that,
involvement.
Yes.
Presence of respiratory muscle involvement, cranial nerve involvement,
Yes.
autonomic disturbances.
Yes.
Any paresthesia, tingling, numbness.
Yeah. So with respect to the history, there are a few other pointers which will help us get to the diagnosis. One is the presence of radicular pain, like in Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis. So ask for a radicular pain radiating right from the down the innervation of the nervous distribution, and then presence of history of dysphagia, dysphonia, and drooling will indicate that there's presence of a lower cranial nerve involvement. And never forget to get a history of dog bite. So usually if there's a history of dog bite, they can present with ascending paralysis from the site of bite. The paralysis may ascend up to involve the upper limbs and then the central nervous system. And in myasthenia, diurnal variation, like the ptosis, which is progressively worsening towards evening. And they can also have, because of extraocular muscle weakness, they can also present with double vision. As I already mentioned, in diphtheria, so always ask for a history of bull neck in the recent past. They could have had some membranous tonsillitis in the past and then presenting with a bull neck and recovered from it and then will present with diphtheritic neuropathy. And never forget to ask for history of recent injections in the gluteal region, which can cause neuritis and usually a paralysis of the, usually it's an asymmetric weakness of the limbs. Then what are the drugs you think of can cause paralysis?
Diuretics.
Okay.
Vincristine.
Yeah. What does it cause, vincristine?
Cause peripheral neuropathies.
Okay. And I had already mentioned like aminoglycosides and phenytoin can also involve the neuromuscular junction. And lead, mercury, arsenic can all cause peripheral neuropathy. Okay, so as Prachi had already mentioned, you should also go and ask for history of involvement of the bladder, like whether there's any urinary retention or overflow, when there is involvement of the cauda equina lesions, where in S2, S4 lesions and all that, you can have urinary retention and overflow. Okay, but never forget to get a history of snake bite and organophosphorus poisoning. These conditions you can have involvement of the neuromuscular junction. Okay, so what other relevant history? Anything has been left out as far as history is concerned?
Canned food intake.
Pardon?
A history of intake of canned food for botulism.
Okay, botulism. Usually intake of honey, no? Contaminated honey or canned food. Yes. What is the type of paralysis you get in botulism?
Descending paralysis.
Okay.
Red urine.
Okay. So with your, I think, done with the history. So what are the other important parameters while examining the child? What are the important parameters you're looking to in a child with acute passive paralysis?
Bulbar involvement, respiratory muscle involvement.
So it's very, very important. So we should always look, take care of the ABs, ensures airway breathing circulation. So ensure protection of the airway and adequate ventilation, and check the heart rate, blood pressure. And if there's a history of trauma, you should immediately immobilize the neck to prevent any second scivora. So what are the other parameters like what are that, which can tell you that there is respiratory weakness? What are the other parameters you're looking to? As you said, bulbar weakness. Yeah. So tachypnea, use of accessory muscles, swallowing dysfunction, cooling of secretions, weak cough, reduced speech volume, and tachycardia and diaphoresis. So all these can tell that there is respiratory weakness, but you should always have be a little cautious, because these children with respiratory paralysis need not present with tachypnea. And so they may have a respiratory muscle weakness. Just with the respiratory, they can have respiratory acidosis, but they may not have any respiratory excursions or tachypnea. So we should be very careful, as you will have to look for the sensorium, see whether the child is drowsy. And these are the things which you have to look into, because many of these children may not present with respiratory distress. Okay, so now going on after the physical exam, what are the important things differential diagnosis you can offer at this point of time?
Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Yeah, and then
transverse myelitis.
Okay. Okay.
Vaccine, acquired polio.
Yes. So Guillain-Barré syndrome, poliomyelitis, transverse myelitis, and traumatic neuritis. So can anyone tell me briefly what are the physical examination? What are the features in Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Hypotonia, decrease or absent deep dental reflexes.
Okay.
There can be involvement of bowel and bladder in the initial stages. And the onset is actually acute and progressive, rapidly progressive, ascending type of paralysis.
Yeah.
We have to look for cranial nerve palsy,
Yeah.
7th nerve palsy, 9th, 10th.
Yes.
And we have to look at the blood
What
pressure.
about the sensory involvement in Guillain-Barré syndrome?
It can be there transient.
Yeah. So is it sensory involvement or more of paresthesia, numbness, and yeah, so more of sensory involvement. So Guillain-Barré syndrome, the weakness, which will be symmetrical, ascending, proximal, distal will be more involved than proximal, muscle tone will be reduced, DTRs will be absent, and you can have a feeling of numbness, tingling sensation, and pain up, and the involvement of the lower cranial nerves. Respiratory insufficiency may be present in many of the cases. So how will you examine for respiratory insufficiency?
Use of accessory muscles.
Yes. What is a single breath count? How do you do it?
Taking is.
Ask them to take a deep inspiration and hold them for at least 30 to 50 seconds.
Okay. So if they're able to do it, then you can dismiss that they have respiratory insufficiency. But however, if they're not able to count till 20 or more than that, then it's probably they are going in for a respiratory insufficiency. Okay? Then what autonomic symptoms may be present? What are the autonomic symptoms? I think Prachi had already mentioned, no?
Bradycardia, labile weak.
Okay. So this is a clinical assessment of by modified Hughes disability scale, wherein 0 is healthy, 1 can present with minor symptoms, where they'll be able to do manual work. And stage 2, they can walk without support with no manual work. And stage 3 is walk with stick or appliance. Stage 4 is confined to bed. And 5 is requiring ventilation. And 6 is death of the child. Okay, so this is a brief clinical. And what we are going on to the next physical differential diagnosis, poliomyelitis. Anybody would want to, Prachi, why don't you just enumerate what are the physical findings in poliomyelitis? Do you find cases of poliomyelitis nowadays? Is it on the decline, or do you think?
It is on the decline, ma'am, but we are seeing vaccine-derived strains.
And what is the cause of vaccine-associated poliomyelitis?
Most common strain involved is type 2, ma'am.
So what are the polio vaccines which are available right now? The bivalent polio vaccine, what does it contain?
Type 1 and type 3.
So can you just enumerate the physical findings in poliomyelitis?
Weakness will be asymmetrical in this case. There might be fever at onset in the history, and the child might be febrile at examination. And muscle tone reduced, DTR will be absent. Then child will, there will not be any bladder involvement.
Sensory changes may not be present. Usually there's still nerve involvement. You can have sensory anterior motor neuron involvement. Usually there's not much of a sensory involvement. Do children with infants with SMA have sensory involvement? SMA, not spinal muscular atrophy. Do they have sensory involvement?
No sensory involvement.
Yes. So, and they are not no involvement of sphincters also, no? Sphincters are usually intact. Okay. So poliomyelitis, usually the onset is 24 to 48 hours from the onset to full paralysis. Fever is present usually at the time of diagnosis, and the paralysis is usually asymmetric and descending paralysis. Here you have both proximal weakness equal to the distal weakness. Muscle tone is reduced, DTR is low, and DTRs may be absent, and usually they have a severe myalgia with no sensory loss. They usually have a backache, and they can have meningismus, and they can also present with a tripod sign. No, they sit with a tripod sign because of the stiffness of the back. And cranial nerve involvement may be present. If cranial nerve involvement is present, they can go in for respiratory muscle paralysis also. And autonomic signs, are they present? Usually not present, extremely rare. Okay. So going on to the next differential diagnosis, transverse myelitis. Can Raghu elaborate on the features of transverse myelitis?
The onset will be acute, ma'am, and it will be symmetric. There will be a sensory level. And then
what are the other features of transverse myelitis?
Bladder involvement.
Yeah, early bladder involvement, right? Here again, there's usually these children present to us with acute flaccid paralysis during the acute phase of the illness. They can have, but over a period of time, they develop spasticity. This is during the phase of spinal shock, they present with flaccidity, and then they start developing spastic signs of spasticity. So transverse myelitis, usually the paralysis is symmetric. Muscle tone is usually low during the acute phase, hyperreflexia during the late phase of the illness, and the sensation is usually anesthesia of the lower limbs. But you should always remember that the sensory level, they may have pain at the sensory level. They can have paresthesia and all that at the sensory level. And sometimes when they have the levels, and if the sensory level is higher on, like in the cervical cord, if cervical cord is involved, they can also have diaphragmatic paralysis and respiratory involvement. Okay, so cranial nerve involvement is usually absent, but they can still have high cord lesions. And bladder dysfunction is usually early and persistent. Sorry. So the transverse myelitis consortium working group criteria is the presence of a sensory motor or autonomic dysfunction attributable to the spinal cord lesion. And it also states that bilateral signs and symptoms are usually present, but not necessarily symmetrical. And the paralysis progresses to a nadir in less than 21 days, and exclusion of an extraaxial compression pathology by MRI. These are the criteria for transverse myelitis. And usually 75% of transverse myelitis we see is usually present as LETM, that is longitudinal extensor transverse myelitis, where more than 3 spinal segments are involved. Okay, so we have almost come to the last, the traumatic neuritis. What do you, Tilakavati, can you elaborate on the clinical features in traumatic neuritis?
Traumatic neuritis will be acute in onset.
Okay.
There may be a preceding history of IM injection.
Okay.
There won't be a there will be asymmetrical involvement, and there won't be any bladder or bowel dysfunction or any respiratory involvement,
Very
and
good.
there won't be any cranial nerve involvement.
Yes. So usually onset is asked days. Fever may be present because the child might have been ill due to some other illness, and that would have gone for an injection. So the child might be febrile at the time you get to see the child. And paralysis usually affects only one limb. It's usually asymmetrical because it involves only the limb which has received the injection. And the muscle tone is usually reduced. ATRs are usually reduced or absent. Sensation is pain over the gluteal region and down the limb. Cranial nerve involvement and respiratory insufficiency is usually absent. And bladder involvement is usually there. It's never there. Huh? Okay. So to summarize, in Guillain-Barré syndrome, the weakness is usually symmetrical. Sensory involvement involves numbness and paresthesia. Fever is usually not present at the onset of illness, and bladder involvement is usually occasional and transient. In poliomyelitis, the weakness is usually asymmetrical, no sensory changes, but they have severe myalgia, and the fever is usually present at the onset, and bladder involvement is rare. In transverse myelitis, the weakness is symmetrical, and there is a definite sensory level of anesthesia, and fever may be present at the onset. Bladder involvement is early and persistent. In traumatic neuritis, there is asymmetry of weakness, sensory involvement, pain over the site of the injection site and the particular limb which is involved, and fever may be present at the onset. Bladder involvement is never there. What are the other conditions you can think about in child with acute flaccid paralysis? Raghu, any other condition?
Paralysis.
We have discussed 4 conditions now. So do you think there are any other conditions which you can
paralysis,
think of? Yes.
Diphtheria,
Yeah.
and electrolyte imbalances,
Yes.
Periodic paralysis.
Okay.
Then
Epidural abscess.
Yes. But usually these lesions, it is more of an, you definitely have a upper motor neuron lesion, no? More of spasticity in epidural abscess and all that. You have a sensory level below which you have a upper motor neuron signs. But always remember that when a child comes with a spinal shock, they will present with flaccidity. So you should never forget myopathy, where the proximal muscles will be involved more than the distal, and the deep tendon reflexes are usually diminished. And in neuromuscular junction, where there's a diurnal variation, ptosis may be present, which is progressively worsening over a period of time. Proximal weakness is usually equal to the distal weakness, and preserved reflexes but may be diminished. And as I told you, spinal cord lesions, they can present with, during the phase of shock, can present with flaccidity. So now how do you, so now that you have come to a differential diagnosis, what are the investigations you will do to get to the diagnosis? Prachi?
Ma'am, neuroimaging, CSF,
Yes.
A neuroimaging to differentiate between a demyelinating disorder, in case you want to pick that up. So there will be features of demyelination in case of LETM and in case of GBS, though we don't do it, if we're suspecting GBS, we'll see glidonium enhancement in the MRI of the caudate one. And CSF at the end of 1 week, albuminocytological dissociation, because the protein will be high and there will be lack of cellular response in GBS. And there will be pleocytosis in pull. And nerve conduction velocity studies. That will, in case of GBS, it will differentiate between the axonal variants and the demyelinating variants, which will prognosticate the recovery, because axonal GBS will take more time to recover, and EMG.
You need to send stool for AFP surveillance.
Yes, for sure. I think we should send. We should always intimate the polio surveillance team whenever you have a child with acute placid paralysis. How do you send the stool sample?
Reverse cold chain.
Yeah. How many stool samples and how many hours apart?
2 stool samples, 24 hours apart, 8 grams each.
Yeah. And do you look out for, and I forgot to tell you, do you look out for any residual paralysis in any of this condition, and how long do you wait for their recovery?
60 days.
60 days, ma'am.
Usually 60 days. Even after 60 days, if the paralysis is persisting, you probably can think of poliomyelitis. Okay. So MRI spine will help you identify if there's a spinal cord compression. And in transverse myelitis and epidural, transverse myelitis, as Prachi had mentioned, you can see hyperintensity and epidural abscess. These are all findings which you can give us a clue with regards to the MRI spine. And high CSF cell count in transverse myelitis, poliomyelitis, enteroviral myelitis, and all that. You can have a high CSF count. However, you can have cytoalbumin dissociation mainly in Guillain-Barré syndrome, most often in Guillain-Barré and less often in post-diphtheritic neuropathy and in transverse myelitis, where the protein will be elevated and very few cells will be seen in the CSF. And NCV and EMG, as Prachi already mentioned, you can have a neuropathic pattern, and usually there'll be slow conduction. Conduction will be slowed, and there'll be latency of the F wave. And this usually occurs after the second week. And in myasthenia, look for repetitive nerve stimulation tests, which could give a decremental response. And what about the CPK? In viral myositis and inflammatory myopathy, look for high CPK. And never forget acutely reversible conditions, metabolic causes like hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia. Once treated, these children do immediately get better. And porphyria is another condition wherein a child can present with acute placid paralysis, and we have to look for porphobilinogen in urine. Okay. So how do you manage these children? Any other investigation you would want to do other than whatever has been discussed?
So 6A, ma'am, to look for any.
Anything in particular?
Nothing.
Prachi, any other investigation you want to do? So how will you manage these children?
Mainly supportive management, ma'am.
Okay. Tilakavati, how do you manage a child with GBS? Without respiratory involvement, with respiratory involvement?
Hospitalize the child, and we have to look for respiratory involvement. If there is progressive respiratory involvement like respiratory failure, we have to give on ventilatory support and other supportive measures, and have to start an IVIG if there is respiratory involvement or there is complete weakness at the onset of presentation, or if there is bulbar involvement, and also other options like plasma therapy.
Yes. So IVIG and plasmapheresis, and then long-term physiotherapy, and you need to help them to get to their to have to physical the skills to improve. Okay. So what about the other conditions? How do you rehabilitate other conditions like?
For poliomyelitis, we have to start on physiotherapy and occupational therapy, and also using of splints.
Yes.
And reduce weight bearing movements.
Transverse myelitis, what is the role of what medications you use in transverse myelitis once you have established a diagnosis of transverse myelitis?
Well, steroids.
Steroids. How much of steroids do you use?
30 mg per kg.
Okay. For a period of 5 days, and then follow it up with oral steroids. Right? Okay. So meticulous supportive care and anticipatory respiratory weakness and all that should be supported. Guillain-Barré syndrome, immunoglobulin, 2 grams per kg for 2 to 5 days, and transverse myelitis, IV MPS. And any compressive myelopathy, we'll have to do adequate spinal immobilization, surgical intervention if needed, and steroids may play a role in the management of compressive myelopathy. So any other, and metabolic, as we've already discussed, we have to correct the metabolic disorder if there is a metabolic component to the onset of, which is attributed to the acute flaccid paralysis. Any other myositis and all that have to be treated accordingly. Okay. So before we finish, we'll have to also know what is the definition of acute flaccid paralysis. So it's a clinical syndrome characterized by rapid onset weakness, and it may involve the respiratory and bulbar muscles. Usually progresses to a maximum within days to weeks, and it has a clinical implication as far as health. It is of public health importance, right? Because the Global Eradication Initiative states that any case of AFP in less than 15 years or any case of paralytic illness in a child of any age when polio is suspected should be immediately notified. And AFP is a case of public health importance, and mandating the report of AFP to the public, to the polio surveillance system is very, very important, as we had already mentioned. So before we finish, I just thought we'll put in a word about spinal shock. Spinal shock is a condition wherein a child with an upper motor neuron lesion can also present with the acute flaccid paralysis. Never to miss out this condition, because soon after a spinal cord injury or after any infective myelitis or any other condition, they can present with, like transverse myelitis, they can present with hyporeflexia, flaccidity. Over a period of time, they may develop spasticity. Okay, and what is Miller-Fisher variant of Guillain-Barré syndrome? They can also have facial nerve involvement as well. No? They can also have facial nerve involvement. So this is one of the variants. And what are the two different conditions of GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which you commonly encounter? AIDP and acute AMAN. So you should both of the, where is the level of where is the lesion in both in AIDP? Usually it's demyelination, right? There's involvement of the myelin. Whereas in AMAN, where is the lesion?
Radiculopathy, radical.
Usually the nodes of Ranvier is involved. Nodes of Ranvier. And so they're more or less the same, but more of motor component in acute motor axonal neuropathy. Okay, I think I come to the last slide. Okay. I think we're done with flaccid paralysis.